Barry, and with me today is my good friend and colleague, Gary Ryan. Gary's written a wonderful book, Disruption Leadership Matters. I loved it. And Gary, I understand it's an Amazon bestseller already, even though it's only been out for 6 months, I think, but it's an Amazon bestseller.
Yes. Thanks, Ian. Thanks for having me. It's become an Amazon Kindle bestseller on January the 30th. You tend to remember those dates.
You do. Now, as Gary and I, we've known each other for a long time, and Gary runs an organisation called Organisations That Matter, and he's been around the block more than once, haven't you, Gary? And you've worked with organisations uphill and down Dale. But I love the book for a lot of reasons, and I thought we might touch on just a few things, because you and I have got a conversation with a live audience coming up on the 12th of April, and I'll put a link to that underneath this video. But I thought we'd cover off some of the things. I loved what you call the critical, I think you call it the critical skill that differentiates good from great leaders. I like that. I love the fact that you talk about leveraging diversity and inclusion. I also love the fact that you talk about high performance cultures. It's a bit of a buzzword, but you talk about it in a nice way. And I must say, what I loved perhaps above all was the practicalities of the book. So I thought we might start there, and it's now been out 6 months, been selling. There's obviously been some feedback from folks, so we probably touch on that too. So, but let's begin with this. I guess first of all, what's disruption leadership? Because often people will say disrupted. You called it disruption.
Yes.
Let's start there, eh?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks again for having me. So the disruption is really the name of what the pandemic has done. The pandemic has created disruption, which in my view has actually created a massive opportunity for leaders, because in real terms, Ian, the pandemic has tested what real leaders really think. And I know that you and I are definitely on the same page as this. And I think there's a lot of leaders out there, and there was certainly evidence 2 years ago when this pandemic started that indicated that they might have talked the right talk, but when it came to the test of the start of that pandemic, that first 6-week lockdown, and all of a sudden everyone had to pivot to working from home. And in most cases, employees use their own resources to enable the job to continue to be done on behalf of their organisation that they serve in, right?
Staggering facts. But
staggering fact. And one of the points I argue in the introduction to the book, Ian, is that, maybe on one level, organisations could never fully repay their employees for doing that. And I throw out the story, or imagine if the pandemic never happened and they set up a project, Ian, on, let's say, the 28th of February 2020, that by the 31st of December 2020, we will have developed a capability that we can 100% work from home.
Yeah.
What would have it cost? The consultant fees, the time, what would have been the resistance to the project, et cetera, the true cost of that project, let alone the fact that in most instances it might not have even been successful. And yet people did it without any project, within, in many cases, days, at most a week. In most cases, they pivoted. And so leaders got tested as, do you believe that the folk in your organisation are a human resource or a human being? And what I discovered through some very close to home examples was that, again, despite the nice talk, some people showed through their behaviour, actually you're a resource, you're just a number, with the way they treated their people.
Yep, some incredible stories. I know one where the lass, my client, she had to actually physically sign off at a computer to go to the toilet and sign back in when she came back to work. I mean, it's crazy stuff like that. What are people thinking?
Appalling, And so with those sorts of examples, so the disruption to me says, right, here's not organic, incremental change anymore, slow change. Disruption means step change. This is the opportunity to be quite different, and that more human being-centered view of the world. Yeah. The leaders that are behaving that way are going to shine through. So yeah. I had an opportunity with the book, Ian, to either write one that was all of the negative stories about how poor this human resource view of the world really is, and the fact that human resources was born of Taylorism, Frederick Winslow Taylor, that worked with Henry Ford in 1911, which is 20th century thinking, right? Yeah. And there's a lot about the 20th century that you and I both know, which was great. But also we know that, gee, we didn't treat our environmental resources all that well.
No.
And we probably didn't treat these human resources as well as we could have as well. And the distribution of wealth maybe hasn't been as great as what it was made out to be, despite some people being extremely wealthy from that century. So the point being, Ian, there's a lot about the 20th century. Maybe we should leave there.
I reckon. Well, what it did was, in my view, the great underlining what the 20th century did for humanity was it dehumanized us.
Yeah.
And I think this idea of a third and fourth, fifth industrial revolution is just absolute crap. We don't want to dehumanize people anymore.
No.
But the good news, the positive side, what I'm seeing, sure you're seeing this too, and probably you've got some stories as a part of people who've read the book and started acting on it. There's a great humanizing going on. We're getting rid of industrial systems. I mean, the finance system's industrialized, the medical system, the education system, religion, politics, you name it, it's industrialized.
Yes.
And it doesn't work. And I would argue that it never really worked. And I think Henry Ford himself summed it up, even though I admire some of his genius. He said, we don't pay you to think, we pay you to do, and that therein lies the problem.
Yes, absolutely. And so we've got to, this is the disruption, and this is the step change opportunity. So
what is step change as a concept?
Is highlight who are leaders that are already doing this, or at least trying to do that human being centered view of the world in terms of leadership.
Yes.
And what have they actually done throughout the pandemic? So,
I must just say, because your subtitle is Lessons to Leaders from the Pandemic. So
yes,
it's a good subtitle.
That's right. So, and that's what I wanted to go and find. And I've been very, very fortunate to have the support of so many collaborators to be able to work through the book, to be able to help me. And the wonderful Marie Harris, PhD, who you know very closely as well, her amazing support to keep pushing me along to get the book done. And then her, delightfully, she agreed to write the foreword for the book as well. And, you don't get a project like this done without a lot of support. But, I'm hopeful that what people are, when they're reading some of the stories in the book, they're actually going, you know what, gosh, there are people actually already doing this. And some of the stories are big, like, when I talk about what Superchai Ravanon did at the CP Group from Thailand with 400,000 employees, and I'll share that story specifically in a second, across 20 countries. But so many of the things that the leaders did, Ian, was the classic 1%er.
Yeah.
But the regularity of those 1%ers adds up to show human beings in the organization that they matter. And in fact, just this morning, I was working with one of the clients in the book who is only a small business. They've just hired 6 people in the last 2 weeks as a result of the fact that they didn't lay people off due to the pandemic. When being a small business, they did not have a bucket of gold sitting in the corner to make themselves survive. And what they did is the owner of the business sat down and had a really open and honest conversation with the team about how do we do this together, because we don't know how long this is. But they were restricted in their interstate movement because of the states locking down, and so much of their work is interstate. Now, they've got a different problem now where they've got so much work and training new people. And this morning we spent time focusing on how to manage that problem. But they are 100% acknowledging the fact that their decision to do what was needed to keep the people in the team, to position themselves for the next upturn. And this is what human being centered leadership does.
No problem. You got to convert here. I mean, I've been on about this human being centered leadership, human being centered workplaces, human being centered conversations. And I actually added the word being, because it was human centered for a lot, and that even goes to design. IDEO sort of pioneered human centered design. I put being in there because I want to remind people we're not human doings, we're human beings, and it's not just human centered, it's human being centered.
Yes.
And this, the proof is there's no argument anymore that human being centered organizations are more profitable than those who aren't.
They are.
You can't argue with the massive amount of data that's out there now. but still, a lot of people are still, finding their way. I was saying to someone this morning, 30 years ago when I began, 32 years ago when I began this, there wasn't too many people on the path then, but there's a lot more now. And I reckon books like yours are going to encourage even more. Tell me, because I think something that's an important piece of the puzzle is the organisations that get diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
And who get belonging.
Yes.
And I know you've said some stuff in the book, but talk us through some of that, because I think that's a key piece of this human being centeredness.
Yeah. So, when boards and leadership teams don't have a great deal of diversity, and yet whoever that organisation's serving, whether they're for-profit, not-for-profit, or maybe it's an advisory board, for example, for a government agency or a university or something like that, if they don't have diversity there, how can they fully understand the diversity of the people they're supposedly serving?
Good question.
Now, this creates challenges around diversity, and we don't want diversity to actually start being at the exclusion of some groups of people either.
No,
right?
which has happened.
Which can easily happen. So it's not a simple place, but Nutrien Solutions, which is Australia's largest agricultural company, and just for context, Rob Clayton, who's the managing director here for Australia, realised at the start of the pandemic that gosh, we put 48% of the food on someone's plate we touch one way or another, and we need to stay open, and we need to be able to logistically get things moving around the country from farmer to the plate, so to speak. So he realised right away how important him serving and his leaders serving the frontline people in the organisation, how important that was.
Yes.
To be able to provide that service. And it's absolutely essential that these leaders are focusing on the human beings in their organisation, Ian.
Well, to you and I, it's probably common sense, but it's the key to culture.
Yes.
It's often been said, culture is the way we do things around here. I think that's half right. I admire Steve Simpson's work, the Unwritten Ground Rules guy. I think Steve, but I think it's only half the story. It is the way we do things around here, but it's more how we behave.
Yes.
So it's a being and doing thing, a culture.
Yes.
And I think this whole idea of putting the people first, seeing the people on the front line as the ones we've got to serve, because they're, after all, the people that are serving the customers and the stakeholders.
Yes.
And the leader at the back, in this case, it'd be Rob. He's actually the least most important person in one sense. But if he's driving it from way back there in the chain and it's going forward, then it's magical, isn't it?
So one of the big things in diversity that they've got, they recognise that they didn't have a great deal of diversity from a gender point of view, and they do realise that they haven't had a great deal of diversity, which is a bit of a common problem in regional Australia and rural Australia, even though there is diversity out there, right? But their diversity of their workforce has been so. Despite the pandemic and despite the need to continue to contribute to getting 48% of that food on the plate, Rob and the leadership team said, no, we and Rebecca Staines, who I mentioned in the book, we need to continue to push forward with these diversity goals that we've got, and absolutely not be tokenistic about it, and make sure that we're creating opportunities right through their talent pipeline.
Yes. I like the flow of I think it's DIEB, so diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging. I like the flow of that.
Yes, yes.
And I think it's not just gender.
No.
And I see the most successful organisations are definitely on that path. And what I've seen, interested in what you've seen, it increases the sense of belonging of everyone.
Of course it does. Yes, absolutely.
Which is a key factor. You don't see this in productivity surveys a lot. I read one from Deakin University, just put out you know, the ROI on L&D, which is an interesting thing. There definitely is an ROI that you and I already know. They say it's for every dollar you invest in RD, you get $4 back, was their conclusion.
Yep. Wow.
But interestingly, in there's not a lot of talk about some of the things that we're mentioning here. No doubt they're part of the equation, but I think we're moving away, aren't we? And I'm interested in your views on this. We're moving away from industrialized measurements to more intangibles, which of course is the human being centered work.
Yeah, which is uncomfortable for some folk. And look, we've got to be prepared to go to some uncomfortable places to start with on topics like diversity and inclusion. So, you know, one of my clients at the moment, as a result of folk having been exposed to the content of the book and that particular chapter, have actually put their hand up and said, we aren't diverse and inclusively with the way we are behaving in our organization. And the simple example is the jokes that we tolerate.
Yeah.
Now, what a courageous and wonderful starting point. Like,
they put their hand up and
absolutely, they're being honest about it. And it's not easy. Like, it's uncomfortable. And it's like, you know, but we were only joking. And it's like realizing, well, you know, and on that person, you know, that person didn't mind. Well, yeah, they were the only person from that race out of 30 people on site. What choice have they got but to pretend as if it's okay? Oh, yeah, but I checked with them if it was okay. But what if we didn't? At least they're now having the conversations. But well, what if we didn't have to even risk that it might be uncomfortable in the first place for them? And why do we have to focus on their race? Why can't we be joking about something else? Like,
it's an interesting shift, isn't it? The language that's going on. I mean, I hear the politicians talk. They talk confrontational conflict language. You know, it's not just it's us here, but in the way we talk about China, I don't understand it. Why would we want to be confrontational and talk about conflict? Why wouldn't we talk about building a great relationship? Well, I don't get it.
Well, especially when, let's be honest, a lot of organisations have people from Chinese backgrounds, whether they're Chinese Australians or still residents of China that are living and working in our country. You're absolutely imagine how uncomfortable the past few years have been for those folk.
I don't get it, Gary. But we've got a microism of that confrontational conflict, you know, aggressive, just because they're different.
Yes, yeah. And
as far as I know, their blood is the same color.
Yeah, and you know, it's we, you know, as human beings.
It's not us and them, and yet we deliberately create this us and them. And in organisations, there's a microism of that thinking still evident. And I would argue, interested in your view, the great disruption is getting rid of us and them.
Yeah, it has to be we. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's the way forward, and there's no doubt that that from a diversity inclusion point of view, that people are really starting to understand that. And look, I'm still learning, right?
Me too.
You know, I'm on a great journey about understanding Indigenous Australia better, and as a non-Indigenous Australian, I'm learning absolutely heaps at the moment. And you know, maybe I should have done that 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
I'm amazed. I'm from the Alan Weiss School.
Yeah.
He says, I'm amazed at how stupid I was 2 weeks ago.
Oh, the pity, you know, the sad thing is I might agree with you there, Ian, but
it's fast, isn't it? I've been reading a wonderful book called Songlines about how the Aboriginals tell stories and how the Indigenous people have been telling stories for at least 60,000 years.
Yes,
and it's just been it's stuff that I knew because I've been telling stories for a long time myself, but it's been refreshing to really get that in the stories, the wisdom, and people don't need how-tos because the wisdom's inherent in us and it'll come to us when we need it. And that's the power of the story. And you've got some wonderful stories in here of real people doing real things. And now you've got 6 months of folk working with the book. What's been some of the feedback you've been getting from people who are using the material to help them in their own way to be better.
Well, you know, the beauty is that both I wanted to share the story of these leaders that are being human being centered, but equally, I wanted the book to be a pathway for folk that aren't maybe sure about what to do. So the case studies and stories and examples in the book are really about demonstrating some of the theory that I set. So, for example, I talk about the importance of vision, and a number of organisations that I mentioned in the book realised from a leadership perspective that our vision, mission and values are really not connecting to the people in the business. It might make sense to me as the ultimate leader in the organisation, but it isn't making sense. I'm not seeing it making sense to the people. So let's use the pandemic as an opportunity to go and refresh it, revisit it, update it, whatever you want to call it, to make it real. And I guess the important lesson there is they're realising that the power of actually going back there, but then more importantly, in the power of actually including it regularly in conversations about what we're trying to do.
Yes.
So, for example, again, that client again this morning, you know, we're talking about, they actually had at the leadership team level said, one of our values, we are not living. We're not living it. We keep avoiding the reality. It was just goosebump material, and they're going, yeah, we're avoiding the reality that we're not living this value. Now, either it's not a value, which is okay if it's not, let's not have it, or what do we need to change behaviorally so that it is real? This
is the key. I think you saw my newsletter on LinkedIn this morning. It was about exactly this, because for a lot of people, the value is still the word. It's not the word, it's the behavior. And yes. It's not just the behavior, it's the agreement of what the behavior is.
Yes.
And then it's conversations like this, when someone realizes we're not living that behavior, to gather around and fix it.
Yes. And which can include, well, it's not a value.
It's not a value anymore. We actually didn't get this right.
Yeah, we didn't get it right. It might be the other ones are enough, or we've got one that a new one that needs to exist. And maybe we need to be talking with people in the business more. We've got a whole bunch of new people. Maybe they might be able to inform us about what they think it might. Like some wonderful opportunities. And this is a
sort of key piece. And you said this 7 or 8 times. Absolute convert here, because it's the nature of my work, but ongoing conversations.
Yes.
It's got to be ongoing. Now, we're just going to have a couple more minutes. Gary, I know you've very kindly, there's a special offer. People can get $5 discount off the book.
That's correct.
I'm going to put a link under the video that'll give people the code.
Yes.
There's an online course they can look at. There's an audio book. And I'll put the details, but you and I are going to continue this conversation with a live audience. It'll be a small group. I'll put the link to that. That's on the 12th of April.
Yes.
But before we go, maybe a bit about this Thailand company. I think 200,000 employees. They've done some amazing things, and perhaps a little bit about that, and then a final sort of wrap up.
Yeah, so Supachai Chairavanant's the CEO of the CP Group based in Thailand, and that has 400,000 employees across 20 countries, Ian.
Amazing.
And sometimes I feel that folk in Western countries like Australia, we look down on Asian-based companies,
yeah,
and don't think that they're, we think that they're behind. Our mindset is that they're behind wherever we think we are, but
more than likely they're ahead.
Well, in this case, by a long way. So when the pandemic started, so they're in agro business and retail. So their retail is a lot of 7-Eleven stores throughout Asia. So when the pandemic started, Supachai sat down with his leadership team and said, right, none of our 400,000 people are going to lose their jobs because of this pandemic. None of them. Some of them won't be able to work for some time, and we need to retrain them, because if they're in retail stores that are not open, they've got nothing to do. I want you to go to your budgets, and in the non-salary line items, find savings to pay for the salaries of people that for some period might not even be able to do any work, but also for their retraining and re-equipping so that they can do new work.
Incredible, isn't it? Common sense, but so wonderful to hear.
So opposite, Ian, to what most other leaders, did, which was let's reduce headcount to save money, because of course you're a resource. So that's
terrible, terrible, terrible word, headcount.
But in addition, the real kicker too with Super Chai's story is he said, in addition, leaders, I want you to go and find our staff who have a partner who works for someone else who lost their job because they were seen as a resource. And because we're in agro business, I want you to give them vouchers so they don't have to worry about food on the table for their family that their partner's income would have paid for.
Incredible.
Incredible.
It's called being a human being, but how good from a CEO of a 400,000 employee organization.
Now, on top of that, from a holistic global perspective, the CP Group has a goal to be have zero emissions by 2030. And Super Chai says, I don't need a government to tell me that I should do this. It's just the right thing to do. And even still, we might be late. We should have done this earlier. But we're imposing the goal on ourselves, plus zero waste. Zero emissions and zero waste by 2030. And absolutely made this public and repeated these goals throughout the pandemic, Ian, hasn't withdrawn from them because of how difficult the pandemic has made the world. What a great example.
A 21st century leader by the sounds of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Gary, really appreciate your time. I've got goosebumps and excitement about our conversation on the 12th of April. Again, folks, I'll put the link below this and there'll be posts on LinkedIn and other places because we'd love you to join us on that day. Anything else, Gary, just as maybe a sort of a summary of what's at the heart of Disruption Leadership Matters?
Well, the core skill that we didn't really spend time speaking, we just touched on, is about conversations, and we spoke about ongoing conversations. But
I kind of alluded to it, but yeah, this is the critical skill between good and great leaders.
Correct, and that's what we'll spend a fair bit of time talking about in more detail on the 12th of April, Ian. And it's a skill that people think they have, but in practice, behaviourally, that most folk are actually a long way off. So I've been specialising in conversations for the last 10 years. I was having a lot of them before that, but I've had a number of wake-up calls. I thought I was a good listener. It turns out I wasn't. Really, I could do a lot better. I thought I knew the different nuances. Turns out I didn't. So even when you've been working with this stuff for a long time, it's been a fascinating journey. But I think at the end of the day, it is perhaps, I would say self-awareness is the number one leadership skill and awareness of others is number two. But I reckon being able to have human being-centered conversations is hot on those two. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, we can go into more detail about that on the 12th, which I look forward to that extended conversation.
Wonderful. Well, we'll again, folks, I'll put the various links, including Gary's special offer, and we look forward to seeing you on the 12th of April.
Okay.